that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Hello, it's good to be with you again, and we turn now to the third of Jesus' 7 sayings on the cross. We read in Matthew chapter 27, verse 45. Verse 41, the chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders mocked Jesus. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and then we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And in the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. And from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the land. And about 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when he cried again, he gave up his spirit. I'll always remember it was a bright, sunny spring morning approaching midday. I was walking with some friends across sand dunes. The air was filled with birdsong of skylarks hovering high in the sky and the screeching of gulls gliding overhead. It was a beautiful sunny scene. But quite suddenly, everything changed. There was a sudden chill in the air, an eerie silence. No song of birds, no screeching gulls, and everything went quiet, dead quiet. And the sun disappeared. It became dark, very, very dark, not normal for mid-morning. And it felt really eerie and creepy. And that darkness continued for a couple of minutes. Then gradually the sun reappeared and the sound of birdsong resumed, because we had just witnessed what we call a solar eclipse. But when darkness fell over the land at midday in Jerusalem as Jesus hung dying on the cross, it lasted for 3 hours, and it could not be explained as a solar eclipse. It was a powerful symbol of what was going on in the city that day. For out of that eerie darkness and silence, bystanders heard a voice crying out in the Aramaic language, my God, why have you forsaken me? And many there who were Jews would have recognized those words came from Psalm 22. And we might ask, why did Jesus recall these words at this moment? Well, different suggestions have been made. First of all, some say it was a cry of unbelief and disappointment. Did Jesus' faith fail at the moment of crisis? Had he expected his Father to intervene, last-minute rescue with legions of angels, but no help came? Was it a cry of unbelief or disappointment? Some others say no, it was a cry of loneliness. Notice that Jesus here doesn't address God as Father, as he did earlier when he said, Father, forgive them. Was he going through what some have called the dark night of the soul, when he lost any sense of the feeling of God's presence? In other words, he was not forsaken, but he simply felt forsaken. And then some others have even suggested that it was a cry of victory, since Psalm 22 ends in a great cry of triumph. Well, if that were the case, why then did Jesus not quote the words at the end of Psalm 22, which say, he has not despised the suffering of the afflicted, but he has listened to his cry for help? No, surely it was none of these emotions that Jesus was expressing, because here was a cry of real dereliction. Jesus was not asking a question to which he didn't know the answer, but he was quoting Psalm 22 because it was now being fulfilled in him. It was not merely that he felt forsaken. He really was forsaken. You may remember that earlier in the upper room he could say to the disciples, you will scatter to your homes and leave me alone, but my Father is with me. But now Jesus is all alone. He has been abandoned by the Father to taste the darkness of hell. What Jesus had spoken of many times He spoke of outer darkness, a place of eternal regret and darkness and bitterness. He was himself now experiencing both spiritual as well as physical death, because God's judgment on our sin was falling on him. Paul explains it in these words. He quotes the Old Testament, "Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree." And then he adds this, "Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law because he became a curse for us." In other words, Jesus was not only rejected by human courts and condemned to death, he was not only rejected by society, and that was why indeed he was crucified outside the city wall, but he was rejected by God, shut out into hellish darkness. That was the meaning of his cry. But it was not the end of the story, because two other dramatic events were to follow. As Jesus breathed his last, we read that the curtain in the temple was ripped open from top to bottom. That symbol of separation between sinful man and God that had stood for centuries was gone. For many years I used to travel north and south and south and north, and we would go through the town of Newry with its busy streets and the traffic that made things very slow. That is until engineers blasted open a new route through a rocky mountainside outside the town and created that wonderful new dual carriageway, that ring road, which allows traffic to flow without hindrance. And according to the Bible, on the cross, Jesus blasted through the impenetrable mountain of our human sin that had shut us out from God, and he opened up what the Bible calls a new and living way to God. The way of access to God that had been closed was now open. But 36 hours later followed an even more dramatic event. The stone of Jesus' tomb was rolled away and God raised him from the dead, a public vindication that he had fulfilled completely the mission that the Old Testament prophet had spoken of. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. By his wounds we have been healed. After the suffering of a soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. In other words, on the cross, he embraced the wages of our sin so we would not have to. He was abandoned by God so you and I could be welcomed back. He entered the utter darkness of hell so we would be saved from it. He was shut out from fellowship of heaven so you and I could be brought in. And that meant that now the good news of the gospel could be announced. Paul describes the Christian gospel as being called out of darkness into God's marvelous light. And that has been the experience of so many in coming to Christian faith, like a solar eclipse, the light dawning in their lives after the darkness. We read in the New Testament that men and women, including many priests who had condemned him and a centurion who had helped crucify him, joined the company of those who believed and followed Jesus. We think of that waster Augustine 400 years later, who squandered the first 37 years of his life on self-indulgence. He was screwed up inside with guilt and with confusion. But it was sitting in a garden in Milan where he read, as it seemed by chance, some verses from the Bible. And the truth dawned, and he later recorded, "In that moment the light of truth and assurance flooded my heart. My doubts were completely dispelled." Or C.S. Lewis experienced a more gradual affair. He writes, "I come to believe in Christ as I believe that the sun has risen. Not because I can see the sun, but by it I can see everything else." For C.S. Lewis, it was like a dawning sunrise. Or as one less intellectual man who met Jesus put it very simply, "Once I was blind, but now I see." To come in faith to Jesus, God's Son, is to come into the light. We must choose to do the same, or to remain in the darkness. Thank you for listening.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear send